the 1965 Watts Rebellion.
A large part of what shaped the landscape of racial tension in Southern California was the Watts Rebellion of 1965. The Watts Rebellion started after a Los Angeles police officer pulled over a young man named Marquette Frye. It began as a traffic stop, but escalated very quickly. An eyewitness told the Los Angeles Times, "I remember that they took him and threw him in the car like a bag of laundry and kicked his feet in and slammed the door." Many community members looked on and started to become more concerned as the police became more belligerent. This culminated in the police officers arresting and beating not only Marquette Frye, but multiple members of the Frye family who had tried to step in and help Marquette. The crowd grew and became angrier at the police brutality they were witnessing. After the police left, the tension escalated and led to 6 days of uprisings that ended in 34 deaths, over 1,000 injuries, and 4,000 arrests, and $40 million in damages. As a result of the Watts Rebellion, real estate prices plummeted.
Okay, so let me put up this comment. Parker was on a roll. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Well, I'll just paraphrase it because I don't think I can find it right now. Oh no, it's right here. It's interesting hearing you all talk about some of these historical events when you experience them in real time. My perspective is just learn about it for the first time in high school or college. This, to me, my opinion, if you notice the events that I choose to talk about is really more easier to digest because unfortunately you can see the similarity between then and right now in 2023. So it's funny when I always hear people, that's old news, that's old, that's old, that was a long time ago. When you clearly see that, yeah, that event may be a long time ago. The situation of that event still going on. It is literally still going on. There's not much of a change. Thea said it. It's not much of a change. 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
But the reason why it does that, Marlon, for those of you out there, which is one of the reasons people like myself have lost so much patience trying to explain things to people, is you look at, I'm going to use George Floyd or even Philando Castile or any of the many, many people who were murdered by the people we pay taxes to, but have always murdered our sons and daughters. When you come from the protected class, aka not black, not certain levels of Latino, because there's levels to this, then you have been fed an image. Matter of fact, we have all been fed an image that the police are your friends, that if you weren't doing anything wrong, then you wouldn't have a problem. I don't do anything wrong, so I don't have a problem. So it must be something you did. Or the classic, well, what happened before the tape started, right? These types of things, when you're coming from, we're both coming to it or receiving it the same way, right? Because for the most part, we're raised amongst each other, especially someone like myself that was raised very, very much integrated. So where you have a breakdown is when your lived experience does not run into conflict with the messaging, with the story. So for much of white America, they see each of the things that come news as an isolated event. So when something occurs, something happened to this person, and they will agree with you, they will agree with us that looks bad. That is horrible. They'll agree to that point. But because it's an isolated event to them, they then naturally run the numbers to whatever level they can. And they say, well, that's one person. The police interact with thousands of people every day. And yes, this horrible thing happened. And if it's wrong, then investigate it and hold them accountable, blah, blah, blah. But they can't tie it all together because for them, it was just a next event. But when your lived experience is in conflict with the story, which is much of our experiences, then you're seeing this and you run a different set of math. Now, what comes forward for you are all the stories that you have been told or shared with about your family, about your friends, about your parents' friends, about the people up the street, about everything comes together and the tapestry is woven because it's one more event for us. It is not a separate event as it is to them. So the emotional reaction is completely different because we have life experience that says, no, I know this isn't an isolated event. But for them to get there with us, they have to overcome cognitive dissonance. They have to attach themselves to a lived experience that they have no concept of and unravel their patriotism to latch onto this. It's so much easier to just write this off as a separate new event. And then you start teaching history, which is why they don't want history show. And they start piecing some things together and it becomes sad and it becomes depressing and it becomes unfortunate and the dissonance starts getting louder and louder and they need to shut it off. And then here we are.
That always boils down to me of the concept of it's always bad apples. It just makes the number smaller. It just makes
It's bad apples. It's bad apples because it's true. It's true. The overwhelming number of police officers are just people doing their job. If that were not true, there would be more people dying every day at the hands of the police. So, as a fact, these are bad apples. But where the disconnect comes in is that we are telling you it's more than the bad apples. We are telling you that the bad apples are a representative bunch of the entire orchard. We are telling you that because you will not address the bad apples, the entire tree is bad. And since the tree is bad, that means all the other trees are sick. And that means the orchard is sick. And that means that the farmer is lazy. And that means that this is intentional at this point. That's what we're trying to tell you. But that's painful. It is an uncommon thing for an American white person unless they grew up in an integrated environment. Right? They grew up in a very integrated environment. It can be a little different because human interaction conflicts with things and you start seeing things a little different. But if you grew up isolated, for you to agree with what I say about your community, for you to agree with what I say about your people, you now have to look at your mother and your father differently. You have to look at your grandparents differently. You have to look at everything that you hold true and see it differently. And that's painful. And you have the luxury to opt out. Now, when you have the option to take your hand off the stove, how many people are willing to lean in to the stove? Human nature forbids it. And that's why we continue to fight. Sorry, bringing all the sunshine today.
Let the world say amen. Amen.
And Parker, ask your parents, ask your grandparents, because yes, these things happen once a generation, and there should be some family stories of what happened. How did you feel during those times? Start the conversation.
In 30 years, we will be asked these questions.
Yep.
Assuming that we're free enough to answer them. Because if we're entering into a new round of Jim Crow, it will not look the same as a Jim Crow in the history books, people. But the effect will be just the same. The subjugation will be the same. It may not look the same. And so 30 years from now, 20 years from now, your child will ask, what happened? What did you do? What was it like in 2025? That shit's coming, folks. Because that's what we've done. I don't know about y'all, but I'm pretty sure you have. I've certainly done it. My parents were born in 53 and 55. Montgomery, Alabama. Right? Pure Jim Crow. So please believe I've asked the question. Some answers I was pleased with. Some I wasn't. But life is complicated, but they will ask you these questions. And so far, I'm not pleased with the answer that I'll have to give to my children.